in terms of cybersecurity, what our standards are, and what we recommend, of course. And then we'll go through a little bit of the defense in depth, the importance of maintenance, a brief summary, and then I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story about something that actually happened to me. This happened to me just a couple of months ago, right before you go to lunch, so you can ponder the situation and come up with your own assumptions of what may have happened. So, once again, let's get started really quick with respect to the preferred target. I think we all know, as a matter of fact, that the preferred target is energy, and if you add up the energy-specific industries here, you'll see that 52% of the targets in the past couple of years have been specific to energy. Now, what does this mean? No, it doesn't mean that banking and finance suffered zero attacks. This is the change in attacks over the past couple of years. And as a matter of fact, I was looking at these numbers just 3 days ago. These numbers have subsequently been upgraded. As a matter of fact, the ICS CERT has updated this to over 60%. So that's a big number. Obviously, when we take a look at that, we understand the fact that this is risk versus reward, right? If you're a hacker, if you're an organization that's looking to take down any particular network infrastructure, if you have the risk of going to jail for the next 5, 10, 15 years of your life, you want to make sure that it's worth it, right? And that's obviously why they're targeting the energy sector. So if we take a look at one in particular, and again, in the cybersecurity world, these numbers change very, very quickly. This particular malware infection was mentioned by the folks at McAfee yesterday during the presentations. Havex was actually a failed attempt when it was first introduced. But what we noticed is that it was recreated by a group called the Energetic Bear. They try to make themselves sound as cute as possible, right? And basically what it does is it attacks the specific tools, the software tools online that companies like us, or like anyone for that matter, would download to update or patch their particular systems. In that way, they were very successful. This particular malware has been keeping us up for the past couple of months, and as a matter of fact, it's not even prevalent anymore because we've started seeing a lot more attacks surfacing. We try and keep our finger on the pulse as much as we can. This particular attack happened a few years ago, but the reason I bring it up in my presentation is because it's really interesting. This has nothing to do with, some kind of a specific breach or a specific targeted attack like you see in some of these presentations. This particular one was a CD that was intercepted from a conference just like this. And what we saw, this is back in 2009, what we saw is that a CD was intercepted through the mail, right, and it was changed en route and then delivered to its target, and over 500 infections from the Equation group have happened in at least 42 countries. And the problem with that is that this particular malware is so advanced that it actually creates a self-destruct mechanism, so researchers really think that there's over 10,000 infections worldwide. So obviously something to consider is the integrity control, right? So let's say, for example, we finish the staging of any particular project, whether it be in our office in Dubai or in Kuwait, or for example in Qatar. After factory acceptance testing is complete, we get the sign-off, we get the stamp of approval, and we shut the system down, we box it up, and we ship it to site. Well, usually by the time it clears customs and by the time it comes back online at the site, you're talking about a month to 2. So how do we know that the system has maintained its integrity? What can we do in order to take steps to ensure that level of integrity? And we'll talk a little bit about that in the slides to come. So in terms of defense in depth, this was one of the very first things that we talked about yesterday. Now, we already know the importance of policies and procedures. We already know the importance of establishing an information security management system, and we certainly know the requirement or the mandate to have executive support for this particular program so that we can make sure that the awareness is out there in terms of our associates. But let's not kid ourselves. We have to have technical controls. Does anybody disagree with the fact that we have to have a certain level of technical controls within our environment? I don't think anybody's going to throw their hands up. So with that being said, Schneider Electric for the past 5 years have invested heavily in the security infrastructure, and we've partnered with all of these partners over here on the right-hand side, and we've made sure to deliver what we feel is the best product capable of securing your architecture. Now, obviously, there's nothing that's 100% bulletproof. Cybersecurity is not a destination that we can reach at and then throw our feet up. We always have to be cognizant of the emerging threats. So we've done things like created segmented networks, and we've standardized on Active Directory, and we use specific DLP and endpoint protection technology technologies. We're big fans. We partnered with McAfee, so we're big fans of the whitelisting product. We feel that that's really one of the last layers of defense in terms of even protecting a system that has been infected with regards to not being able to execute code. We've teamed up with Symantec as well, so we have the option. We're very flexible in terms of the offering, so that we can offer a backup system and an endpoint protection system from multiple vendors. We think that's very, very important, because at the end of the day, if this doesn't fit within your corporate profile, how does it work to your advantage? And the answer is it doesn't, right? We have to make sure that we're flexible. We've got some customers in Oman and in the UK that are requesting a very, very specific Active Directory subsystem. And they went to our competitors and they said, look, this is what we want. We want one Active Directory system. We have 37 plants throughout the world, and we don't want a separate system in every plant. Therefore, we had to go in and design a very specific, mind you, it was customized, I'll admit that. But because of the level of flexibility that this particular environment buys us, we were able to implement a highly customized singular control system that they could manage with their system administration levels. Now, a lot of people throw their hands up and they say, well, wait a second. How do you have IT responsible for an OT system? We have a very big opportunity that we're actually in the factory acceptance phase now for in Qatar. And the people that contacted us were not the OT people. It was the IT folks. It just so happened that this particular guy graduated from the same college that I did back in Buffalo. And he called us up and he said, look, I know that you guys have a cybersecurity division. I know it's based in Dubai, so you're right next door. But we're really interested in making sure that everything within our organization is upgraded and meets the specifications. And when we looked at the asset management system and took a look, we said, well, you have a very old ESD and a very old DCS. Mind you, it was our product, but it's a very old version. And he said, yeah, go ahead and update that too. So you can see that these decisions are now being made from the folks that are ultimately responsible for the technology. In this particular case, it happened to be the IT teams. So what do we recommend in terms of the future? We also like to make sure that we're consistently innovating, but not to the point where we're ever considering connecting the layer 1 devices or even the layer 2 devices to the outside network. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of our systems are completely isolated from level 3 all the way on down. But isolation really doesn't buy you anything if you don't have that management capability. So right now we've got the SIEM on the table. We're actually looking at 2 different ones from QRadar as well as McAfee. We're also looking at third-party patching to make sure that we have a single console for patch management as opposed to multiple consoles. We're looking at an asset and inventory management system. Mind you, we already have one of these for the layer 1 devices, but that's really not enough anymore. We now need a centralized system that really keeps track of anything and everything that they have within their environment. And of course, we're looking at centralized NAC. When we were initially looking into this about 2 years ago, Symantec still had their offering. They've subsequently taken it off the shelves, and we're now looking at an InterAssist solution for network management and network access control. From a consulting perspective, I think everybody's really talked about that, so I'll breeze through this one really quick. We obviously do have a consulting division that performs audits, vulnerability assessments, even ISO 27001 framework certification or compliance, and obviously with respect to the policies and procedures, we're happy to help you create or modify and adjust the ones that you may already have. So what about maintenance? Now you've invested, you've got this shiny new Cadillac, what do we do with it now? We also highly recommend that after the implementation of a DCS or an ESD or a SCADA system that has cybersecurity built within it, we highly recommend one of our what we call the customer first maintenance contracts. This is something that we recommend regardless of which vendor you choose, right? If it's Schneider Electric, if it's Emerson, if it's Honeywell, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is we have some kind of an annual maintenance contract because at the end of the day, this is a fairly complicated system, right? We understand the fact that control system engineers may not necessarily have the experience to deal with an advanced cybersecurity infrastructure, and therefore, we have to have some kind of options in place to make sure that we can at least maintain that for the years to come. So just a brief summary. Obviously, we want to make sure that the program is established. Information Security Management System is called the ISMS. That's one of the foundations of the ISO 27001 framework. We want to ensure the fact that once you design and implement this system, that's really only the beginning. We have to have some kind of a maintenance program, a training program in place, and of course Schneider Electric is very happy to be your partner in that. And of course, the ICS consulting engagement really can't go far enough. As a matter of fact, in our standard maintenance contracts, we actually throw one of these in for free. It's called a short audit, where we'll come in every year and perform a vulnerability assessment and a very small, low-level penetration test, just to make sure that the policies, the procedures, all of the security controls are in place and functioning properly. So, now that we have a couple of extra minutes, I'm going to tell you about my little story. This is what I call the train ride surprise. Matter of fact, right after this happened, I sent an email to all of my guys, and I asked them to give me their opinions on what they thought happened. And I'm interested in seeing what your opinions are as well. So this is a map of London, the Victoria area down here on the southeast side. I was there about a month and a half ago on a business trip, and I took a train ride from a town called Milton Keynes down to Victoria Station, where my conference was being held. That's a goofy picture of me by the Tower Bridge. As always, my wife complains that I'm always on the phone. Over here you can see a snapshot of the ticket that I bought. And mind you, once you see the specifics, you're going to understand maybe the reasons for something like this happening. Over here, you have an actual screenshot of my wife's call log. She has an iPhone. Don't blame me. This particular number here, where are my American guys in the room? Right? What area code is that? 212. New York. That's right. Area code 212 is Manhattan, Midtown. Well, you see that number right there? You really can't see it on screen. That says 3 p.m., right? And the one right above it, that's my mobile number, that's 3:08 p.m. So there's a gap of 8 minutes there. Well, guess what? That 3 p.m., that was me. I called her from my Dubai-based mobile phone, and it showed up as a 212 area code New York number, which was very strange. She looked at it, she said, that's weird, but she answered anyways, right? So she answered the phone, and we started our conversation. Now let me just tell you a little bit about my goofy conversation with my wife. We always joke around, especially when I'm traveling by myself to some place in Europe where she wishes she was, right? The first thing that we noticed was the line was perfectly clear. There was no problems on the conversation. It wasn't clicking, it wasn't ticking, there was no line disturbance, etc. One of the very first things that she said was, I hope you enjoy the train ride along the English countryside. And I laughed and I said, oh yeah, I wish you were here, blah, blah, blah. One of the other things she said was, are you coming home tonight? Joking around. I said, no, babe, I'm not coming home tonight. It's still another 3 days. And she said, be sure to order a nice hot cup of English tea. And I said, I promise you I'll be sure to do that. And another thing she said was, well, I'm sure it's a lot colder there than it is here in Dubai. And I said, yep, you're absolutely right. So after about 5 minutes of conversing back and forth, I noticed that she's acting very strange. She's acting very strange, and she seems to be repeating things. And her voice, mind you, it's not typically like this, is very monotone, right? So whenever I ask her what she's doing, she doesn't necessarily answer me. She doesn't specifically tell me what she's doing. Instead, she repeats one of these 4 statements over and over and over again. So I'd ask her, okay, what are you doing? And she'd say, I hope you enjoy a nice hot cup of tea. And then I'd say, are you sure you're feeling okay? And she'd say, yes. And I'd say, are you still sleeping? And she would say, no. And then I'd say, okay, so what's going on? And she'd say, are you coming home tonight? I said, okay. The first couple of times it's funny, right? After that, it starts getting a little strange. So I said, okay, so the joke's over. What are you doing? And she would say, I hope you enjoy the English countryside. Something's wrong. So I started thinking, okay, is somebody in my house? I mean, I don't know what's going on, right? I ask her, are you sure you're okay? And she says, yes. And I say, are you still sleeping? And she says, no. I said, okay, so can you please tell me, what are you doing? And she says, well, I'm sure it's colder there than it is here. I said, okay. Now we're talking for a full 5 minutes, and I have no idea what's going on. I'm trying to figure it out. This goes on for such a long period of time that I start thinking, should I try my other phone and call home to make sure that everything's okay from a security perspective, right? Well, guess what? What do you think happens next? Anybody want to take a guess? After a full 5 minutes of me asking her anything pertaining to yes and no, she answers appropriately, yes or no. Anything else, she repeats one of these 4 things. Anybody want to take a guess at what happens next? I'm sorry? If I had time, I would have. I would have sent somebody home. Nope, that's not what happens. Guess what happens next? She called me. I'm on the phone with her, and she called me. So I look down at my phone. This is a screenshot of her calling me. She likes the Wreck-It Ralph movie. So I slide the phone over, and I say, hello? And she says, oh, hi, babe, I'm sorry we got disconnected. I said, wait a second. What do you mean you got disconnected? She said, we got disconnected. Sorry, I've been trying to call you back for the past 5 minutes, but I haven't been able to get through. I keep getting an error message. And I said, you gotta clarify what you're saying here because you're starting to make me worried. And she says, I don't understand. These kinds of things happen all the time. We always get disconnected. It's no big deal. I said, no. Here's what you don't understand. I'm still talking to you on the other line. She says, what do you mean you're still talking to me? And I try and explain the situation over the next 30 seconds or so, and she says, I don't believe you. I said, okay, let me check. Hang on. I flip over to the other line, and there she is, talking in the same 4 statements over and over again. Same exact voice, perfect tone, no problem on the call, no issues whatsoever. I flip back to her and I say, guess what? Your ghost is on the other line. And she says, now you're really starting to scare me, but I really don't believe you because I always joke around and try and make her laugh. So what did I do next? I merged the calls. I merge the calls and she freaks out. She hears herself on the other line repeating 4 phrases over and over and over again. And she convinces me finally to drop both calls, and I did. And then, of course, I called her back on the 8 minutes later call that you saw on the first slide. So what happened? Anybody want to take a guess? What was the first suggestion? System hang? Anybody else? Hacking? One of my friends? All good suggestions. All things that my team also suggested. One of the things they said was, okay, it was a technical malfunction causing me to hear recorded sayings. So how does that justify the yes and no answers? The clear answer is it doesn't, right? Because I threw at least a dozen yes or no questions to her, and she answered each one of them perfectly. So if that was the case, why was my conversation being recorded in the first place? That's an issue of concern to me, right? What about the coherent responses? The perfectly timed coherent responses. It certainly doesn't give justification as to why that happened. So here's what I think happened. It was absolutely 4 random sentences in the beginning of our conversation that were recorded, and so was a yes, and so was a no. So 6 things were recorded, right? After that, those recorded sentences were used as fillers. That's what we call a conversation continuance, to encourage me to take leadership of the conversation. Why do you think that would be the case? Well, I'll tell you why. I'm a Palestinian American on a Dubai phone. I happen to be a registered FAA pilot, and I'm calling my wife in New York, UK, back to Dubai. That's why. That's why it raises flags, right? So in this particular case, if we considered maybe some kind of an error, how does that justify the 212 area code? Now, for those living in the U.S., at least for the past 34 years on my case, whenever you call a number that doesn't work, you get the same exact error message, right? It's the same error message that's been playing for the past 30 years. When I called that number back, it gave me a very different error message. It was a man's voice instead of a woman's voice, and it was very, very specific. So with that being said, I came to the conclusion that this is called stealth listening. This is very similar to the behavior of extremely advanced malware. However, it's created by organizations that have money, right? It has the same kind of footprint that something much more advanced than your average malware would have. So the question becomes, who did it, right? My first guess is the National Security Agency. If they're listening to people in government, they're most certainly going to try and listen to conversations similar to what I was talking about before. You've got a Palestinian Arab American that happens to be traveling in Europe, calling his wife back in Dubai on a Dubai-registered mobile phone, and then throw in the sprinkle of the fact that he's a pilot. Yeah, that raises a red flag, would you think? Well, what about other sinister plots? Could it possibly be a hacking attempt? I don't know. Ultimately, what's the moral of the story? Not necessarily the fact that we know that we need privacy and confidentiality. Everybody in this room knows that we need privacy and confidentiality when it comes to the protection of our systems. But what it really teaches me, at least, is the fact that we can appreciate it more. We can understand the fact when you're slapped with this reality right in your face, you understand that you appreciate that level of privacy and that level of confidentiality. Now, what about monitoring services? Now, in this particular case, I could have put any kind of system on my phone that I wanted to. I would have never been able to stop this type of attack, right? But what about those systems that stay dormant for 5 years? What if we are under attack and we really have no idea that we are, and we only actually see that pop-up come up once it's already too late? Being in the field of security, of course, we always know that somebody's listening, right? In the US, we call it Big Brother. But the reality is, it's just strange the very first time it happens to you. So I was having this conversation with a friend of mine in Germany, and he said, you know what, Jay? This isn't necessarily the issue that you should be concerned about. It's just strange when it actually happens to you. No. The reality of the situation is, this isn't the first time. It's just the first time that you've noticed, right? And that's all for me, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
Lovely. Bit scary, but lovely. All right. Now, we've probably got time for one question before we break for our lunch break. Do we have one question? Anyone? I guess you just scared them, Jay.
Sorry, guys.
No, I'm not going to get on the phone call again to my husband. FaceTime. Do we have a microphone, please?
FaceTime isn't allowed in Dubai.
Unless you have, no, it is. Unless you actually buy your phone
from
not
outside,
from Dubai. Because I use FaceTime in Dubai. All right.
Sorry. Thank you for useful presentation. The challenges we are faced today, the gap between people, newcomers, new engineers, mechanical, electricity, who's working in the field itself, and between the IT, the gap of, the security roles, security competences, security skills, it's easily gained for computer engineer, but the opposite is. So the challenge we are facing in the region, in this gap,
is bridging the gap.
Yes, it's skills, move this IT skills, especially in security, which is in the top layer, to move to the engineer, mechanical engineer or electricity or instruments engineer inside the refineries or the plant. So how we are going to close this gap? Or, no. Thank you.
Excellent question. So in order to bridge the gap, we feel that you have to have a couple